visit his classroom after you had started your investigation in February of 2021 to observe him teaching students?
That had happened. You mean between, well, tell me about the timeline you're talking about.
Between the time that you handed him a letter of direction and the time that he ultimately left the school.
I had
no
not
longer
been back.
working there. Sorry.
I had not been in the classroom.
So let me just clarify that. I think what you said was, I had not been in the classroom.
I had not been in the classroom that I recall.
So were you or were you not monitoring him personally after you gave him the letter of direction?
I was not.
Was anyone monitoring him directly after you gave him the letter of direction?
I don't recall.
Well, who was in charge of communicating to Mr. Power the decisions that had been made about his conduct in February that were reported in February of 2021?
I mean, we felt like there was a concern from students.
Well, you bring in 5 students on the 9th, and all of them are reporting to you inappropriate physical touching, observing that, or experiencing it from Mr. Power. Did you take any steps to alert their parents that they had been in your office and they had been reporting this and you were looking into it?
If I was to take a statement, my common practice would be to have communication with parents.
Okay. And do you recall ever yourself affirmatively calling a parent and saying, for example, I'm calling your student in this case to talk to them about some allegations that have been made against Mr. Power before you talked to them?
We wouldn't have done it on the front side.
Did you make any record when you called the parents?
I did not.
So you don't have any record
I have no record
can show you talked to any of these parents at all?
That is correct.
You had a complaint by 5 students who said there was an ongoing issue in the class that was making them feel scared and uncomfortable. Why, under those circumstances, would you not talk to the teacher?
I think at this point, we were still looking at this as we said earlier, or I said earlier, a boundary issue that we didn't see at that point, we weren't looking at the concern, anything beyond that. And maybe, at this point.
So these types of allegations didn't raise any concerns on the 9th about anything other than a boundary concern. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. I feel like in the letter of direction, it said made kids uncomfortable. That was the piece that I wanted to identify with, made kids uncomfortable, whether or not, whatever that meant, which ultimately is, what made him uncomfortable was that he would pull them in close, or he would grab their hand, or whatever it was, the different things that he would do, they made them uncomfortable, which is why we wanted to go down the road we did with the boundary issue.
What facts that you had learned through your investigation made it clear to you that this was just a boundary issue and not something more like grooming of students?
I would say that we didn't have anything that, in my opinion, or the others in the room, believed was beyond that.
Well, what would have been beyond that? What type of fact would you have had beyond 5 students complaining about a guy who's grabbing them on the hips and touching them on the back and rubbing them their backs, and that went over several months time period, and the evidence you had that students were saying it was scary, it made me uncomfortable, it made me feel weird, and you saw their text messages that went back? To have beyond that to be concerned that this might be some sort of a grooming behavior?
It just wasn't seen that way. In my eyes, it wasn't seen that way. As I communicated with each of the girls, it seemed like an over touchy teacher that needed to make sure that they were within their lines.
And then you leave him these several different items here where you indicate that you can use physical contact when redirecting students, repositioning students, or putting students into specific formations for curriculum purposes. Did you consider that making a student emotionally upset or frightened was a danger to the student?
I did not see it as a major concern. I do know the emotion part is very common within younger students. And I ran into that a lot. So there was a lot playing on this, whether it was about this case or it was just about a report. So did I feel that way? I did not. I felt like we had a teacher that was outside of their boundaries at times and needed to be reined in and knew exactly when their boundaries, what they were and when they could use physical touch, I guess. Felt like the letter of direction was going to give him the boundary understanding enough that he could make the changes in himself. He was a 60 plus year old man, been teaching for multiple years. Obviously the situations he put himself in at our campus were potentially different than others, I guess, or things have just changed over time.
You keep saying his hugging and hand on the back. Did you see this as this was just some light hugs and hands on the back, or did you see there was more in those allegations?
I felt that there were some boundaries that would be crossed.
And so did you make a decision that what you saw happening was just a boundaries issue and wasn't anything deeper than that?
From what we saw, this was all happening in view of the class. It wasn't like hidden.
Assess whether any of what you were hearing or seeing here could reflect the type of things that might be grooming.
Typically, when grooming situations happen, from my understanding, they happen behind closed doors. They happen in an isolated situation, not in front of a whole class, not in front of a whole group of students.
You just stated that it's what you found to be true. Have you done investigations yourself about behavior to determine whether or not it's grooming behavior or it's something else?
I have not.
Conversations did you have with your group about whether to obtain more information about Mr. Power's behavior from either other students or from him or anywhere else?
So again, based upon the data that we had there, we felt like we had enough to move forward with a letter of direction under the guidance of Dr. Filloon and HR.
Did you have any discussions in this collaborative process that you're just testifying about should we also follow up with all these other students that no one's interviewed yet?
I don't believe that was a part of the conversation.
Did you have any other faculty members that you remember at any point in time as a principal who had this sort of level of reporting from students who were being made uncomfortable, students who were dropping out of his class because of it, those type of events? Did you ever see that with anyone else before?
No.
So consider these reports to be serious?
I did.
Did you ever at any point in time take any notes of any of the meetings that you had with your team where you were collaborating on what to do about Mr. Power?
I did not take any notes.
Okay. Is that your practice to not take any notes in those type of serious situations?
At the time, no, I would just rely on the fact that the team was there and we were making the decision that was best.
Did you ever consider sending one of those, either yourself, one of those 4 assistant principals, or anyone else from your administrative staff to go observe Mr. Power and see if he was actually complying with the letter of direction?
I didn't direct anybody specifically to.
You're aware that other students came forward with other complaints about Mr. Power within about 5 or 6 weeks after this letter of direction was given?
Correct.
Do you believe your assumptions were incorrect about Mr. Power?
I believe that he made a mistake that I wish he had not by offering to take kids to a technical gun show.
You're yourself walking down, leaving your office, going down to his classroom on any occasions in that entire month and a half between the time you got the letter of direction and the time you get these new complaints, stepping in and seeing how he's behaving or interacting with his students.
And I did not remember going down to his room.
And why not?
I can't tell you other than that the job of a high school principal is demanding, and I have my own evaluations to do and I have my own things to do. So I just did not.
What if anything, did you discuss with your group doing that would ensure a follow-up to the letter of direction and ensure that it was being complied with?
There wasn't.
Your understanding at that time that there was anything prohibiting Mr. Power from going to look for another job as a teacher using his certification?
No, I'm sure he could go find somewhere else to work, but if he had retired, and I'm sure there's rules around that too, but no, he could have gone and found another employment, but I never received a reference call or check.
Did it concern you that the district had decided, rather than terminating him, to let him quote unquote retire? And he might be out there the next day looking for a job at another school?
That wasn't really my concern after he retired.
Did you direct that Mr. Power be provided a copy of the CUSD governing board policy on inappropriate contacts with students?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
I don't know why I wouldn't have done that.
You never did your own investigation about Mr. Power and his class, right?
No,
You never visited his classroom.
no,
Did you ever actually look into what was being taught during these theater tech classes for 7th and 8th graders?
no,
Did you know Mr. Power?
no,
Have you ever met him before?
no,
You know anything about his disposition?
no,
Did you know anything about his attitude toward complying with policies or rules?
no,
But you did conclude that this letter of direction would be enough to stop the actions that were causing students distress.
yes.
Do you, you, not the team, have any knowledge of whether the school or district provided any supervision of Mr. Power when he returned to the classroom?
No,
Do you believe classifying Mr. Power's departure from the school as a retirement is accurate?
yes, because that is what he stated to Dr. Filloon, and that was what reported from HR to the district. So specifically, the term retirement was what was used.
And did you follow up with any of the students that you interviewed or had knowledge were involved in the February 2021 reports after learning of Mr. Power's retirement?
No,
Did you offer or request any services be provided to those students and victims of Mr. Power?
no,
Do you know if anybody at the school followed up with those students to make sure they had services provided to them?
I do not know. I cannot speak to that.
I want to know specifically in this instance, not a general practice. Do you have any knowledge personally that those students were being provided services by the school?
Not personally, no.
On everything you saw, including the material after the first 5 reports from other students, that there was nothing in any of that material that indicated to you that there had been any conditions present at the district that could be harmful to learning.
I didn't.
Did you even consider, maybe I should contact Dr. Filloon, walk down the hall and ask him about these things that look like they could be? This could
No,
have been a
I
threat to
didn't.
student health.
No, I didn't.
And you didn't give a thought to doing that sort of follow-up with Mr. Phillips
I did not.
or Mr. Ridenour
I did not.
or Ms. Woodworth?
I did not.
My first initial thought here is I can't get off the fact, undisputed as far as I can tell, that there were only 5 students interviewed. I can't imagine anyone calling that what was termed a good faith decision or reasonable effort when we're talking about inappropriate touching of minors by a person in a position of authority, a teacher. These acts have been called it, that, this, behavior, actions. And I still don't know what this behavior and actions we're talking about, because only 5 of 13 students were interviewed. There are 8 other students at least, and this, I'm only talking about the February incident. There are 8 other students at a minimum that should have been interviewed. I want to know who those kids are and were they followed up with, and what was their experience. I think that it's grossly negligent for no follow-up to have been performed with those kids. Parent myself, if they had come to me after a day of school crying, getting in the car and saying, my teacher touched me, I can't imagine. And I've got to tell you that as emotional as the testimony was around COVID and what that felt like for teachers, which I grant was difficult isn't the right word. I absolutely will grant that. But as in comparison to what a parent must feel when their student comes to them crying, saying that a teacher touched me inappropriately, there's no, I can't compare the two. I'm sorry. It just, the emotion that was expressed in that testimony and the lack of emotion around the acknowledgement of a parent's horror in hearing that was striking to me.
You have an issue where potentially students are being touched against their will, they are uncomfortable. The word uncomfortable is something that is used when we talk about a hostile work environment. And we have children using the term uncomfortable. And that to me is a red flag. There was a lot of discussion around the fact that there wasn't physical injury to the students. And I'm talking specifically about the ones that were in middle school with the February incident. Middle school students, and I've worked with them for over 20 years, at that age are pretty concrete. And injury means physical injury. They would not necessarily have been thinking about expressing how I am feeling mentally as an injury. And so for that to have been a reason that those students weren't injured, I find to be less than persuasive. And one of the things that was discussed in conjunction with the technical drama class or theater class was the technical gun show. The fact that they glossed over that there was tickets to a gun show where students would, if they went, that's where people buy and sell guns, folks. And there is absolutely no connection to a theater class and a gun show. And so for a teacher to have offered his class tickets to a gun show, I find that not being an issue for them was alarming. And even if you didn't know all of the things that could have potentially gone into a grooming scenario, there were enough things at hand that people were dealing with those student statements over both incidents, the February and the March incident, that anyone that was reasonable and had common sense would have picked up on. The teacher, Mr. Powers, being able to retire. They do, and we understand that there was enough of a concern that we were going to put this person out on administrative leave because there were issues around how they were interacting with students. To not follow up with state board, but to not go through with letting the state board know you don't take the extra step to ensure that not just your students in your district, but all students in Arizona districts are protected from that kind of potential misbehavior and misconduct, you are missing the boat and you are not doing what you're required to do. Amount of experience that these 5 educators have And they do. They have decades of experience, decades, which tells me they should have known better.
Was frustrated with, though, was the lack of advocacy for the adults in the room. And the adults then, again, looking to the next adult to help solve the problem. The severity of action for the March incident over the February one. I feel like had it been handled in February, there wouldn't have been a March incident with the 2 students and the invitation to the gun show because he wouldn't have been there.
To not report to the state board or to your own board that there had been a need for an investigation at the time of the retirement, I think was very derelict.